So last week, I saw Marty Supreme, starring Timothee Chalamet, directed by Josh Safdie. And this is just classic Safdie greatness. Easily one of the best of 2025. I love it. And the reason I'm making this video is because I feel like Marty Supreme is so much more than a traditional semi-biopic sports movie. There's so much this film is trying to say thematically and symbolically about post-World War II New York, Jewish American pride, the irony of the American dream, 1980s music versus 1950s culture, and of course, the true story of the real Marty Reisman. So in this video, after doing plenty of research on the writer-director Josh Safdie, his very talented co-writer, and the rest of his filmmaking team, I want to break down every theme, symbol, major character, and of course, the heavily symbolic ending with the final match and the birth of the baby. So to break this movie down, we're going to use three themes. One, ambitions of a dreamer. We'll discuss Josh Safdie's personal inspiration for the film, the true story of Marty Reisman, the book that inspired the film, and Timothée Chalamet's personal connection to his character. Two, imprisonment of pride. We'll discuss the 1950s American dream, post-World War II Jewish American culture, the symbolism of the 80s soundtrack, the anxiety-driven filmmaking, and Marty's moral ambiguity. And three, preciousness of life. We'll discuss the symbolism of casting Kevin O'Leary, the paddle spanking scene, the character of Gwyneth Paltrow's Kay Stone, Rachel's relationship with Marty, the fertilization title sequence at the beginning of the film, and the meaning of the ending with the final match and the baby, and so much more. Hope you enjoy. Theme number one, ambitions of a dreamer. So, as you walk into the theater for a movie like Marty Supreme, you go in knowing it's a sports movie, and you've likely seen many sports movies before. But as you sit there watching this film, you realize this isn't your usual sports movie. Is it even a sports movie? And with such a non-traditional and unconventional sports movie ending, what was the point? Well, after watching several of director Josh Safdie's interviews, I realized he's making a way bigger thematic point with this film. And for me to begin to capture everything Josh is trying to encapsulate with this movie, I need to start with the very inception of the idea for the film. And I'll let him explain what that personal inspiration was. The inspiration kind of came with the chasing of a dream, the relentless dream that I had to make my last film, Uncut Gems, which was a 10-year journey. And every step of the way, I was ridiculed. No one believed in it. So every day that passed that my dream didn't seem like a reality, it hardened me. And it kind of created this level of urgency. And when I finished Uncut Gems, someone asked me, "Hey, what's next?" And I started to cry because I never thought about that. There was this hollow feeling that I had, and it was that dreams are really for the lonely. So from that quote, we can see how Josh's personal experiences inspired the creation of this character, Marty Mauser, and his story in the film. This laser-focused, relentless pursuit of a dream that requires so much sacrifice, it isolates you and blinds you from the more meaningful things in life. Individualism pushed to the point of solitude. But of course, that's just the personal side to the inspiration. There's also a very heavy historical side to the inspiration, which is, as you likely guessed, based on the real-life version of Marty Mauser, Marty Reisman. So let's talk about him. So toward the end of production on Uncut Gems, Josh's wife and producer, Sarah Rosain, gave him an autobiographical book titled The Money Player, Confessions of America's Greatest Table Tennis Champion and Hustler, written by Marty Reisman. The book describes the wildly unique career and life story of American table tennis legend Marty Reisman. It would tell stories about Marty and his peers growing up in 1950s New York, who were world-class table tennis players, but sadly were the best at a sport that received little to no respect or acknowledgement from their community. So just like we see Marty Mauser in the film, these young men would struggle to hold a job, hop from couch to couch, and hide their extraordinary talents to hustle unsuspecting players out of hundreds of dollars just to earn just enough to get by in the city. But come time for each professional competition, you could find them at the most luxurious hotels as they were broadcast internationally on the world stage. And as Josh read through Marty Reisman's life story, he noticed these striking parallels between Marty's life and his own life. The tireless obsession over the profession, the overwhelming sense of pride, and the Jewish New York American upbringing and heritage they both share. So by combining the trials and tribulations of the real Marty Reisman and his own hard lessons learned over the 10-year process of completing Uncut Gems, he was then able to create the character of Marty Mauser and his story that we see in the film. Marty is incredibly hardened by the ridicule that he has to endure every day, by the fact that this thing that he was put on Earth to be the greatest at is a laughingstock to most people. No one takes it seriously, and it's a joke, a cosmic joke. He was plagued with being the best at something that means nothing. And it makes him focus on his task in a really intense way, and he can get very self-involved. And Josh says, as soon as that character was created with those defining qualities, he knew Timothee Chalamet would be the perfect person to cast for the role. He describes meeting Timothy in 2017 at a screening of Call Me By Your Name in New York, and noticing these big eyes, this wild sense of ambition in his words, and the struggle to control this untamed energy. So untamed that at that same screening, he witnessed Timothy rocking back and forth so hard in his chair, he tipped himself over and fell to the floor. And Josh's recollection of Timothy aligns perfectly with where Timothy says he found the inspiration for the character. I felt this role and the great collaboration with Josh Safdie, the director, gave me an opportunity to channel something that I hadn't been able to on film before, but also that no director ever approached me with, like tapping into who I was in my early 20s or my teens. And this channeling of loud, boisterous, ambitious energy has still certainly carried through over 10 years later. As we've seen in the press tour for this film and the most recent award season, Timothy claiming he wants to one day be named among the greats, Viola Davis, Marlon Brando, and Daniel Day-Lewis. However, of course, the difference between Marty and Timothy is Marty doesn't have nearly the same worldwide respect or recognition. Their circumstances are completely different. Theme number 2, Imprisonment of Pride. So far in this video, we've explored what the extreme of ambition and individualism looks like. But in this next section, we need to take it a step further and discuss how Josh Safdie shows us what can make a young man this way. What are the influences in American and Jewish history and culture that could cause a man to be this dedicated? There were a lot of strange microcosms, footnotes of history that allowed me to kind of understand what was going on in the world back then. Like the evolution of the American dream, the evolution of Jewish pride, the evolution of rugged individualism, and how you can understand a people through the individual, not through the mass. So while Josh uses the character of Marty to showcase what extreme individualism looks like, he then uses all other elements of film like set design, the sound design, and the music to show us how the environment plays a role in making someone this way. And to break this down, we need to start with the historical backdrop, the end of World War II. So after the victory of the United States with the Allies over Nazi Germany in World War II, there was a massive surge in American pride, most notably liberty and individualism, through the idea of the American dream. The idea that in this country, you can be whatever you want to be as a member of this progressive, prosperous land of the free. And there were historical markers in the 1950s that marked this cultural shift. For example, New York architecture took a sudden change in the 50s, focusing more on slicker, simpler, more functional design. A major element of the sets in this film, moving away from the more traditional, old-school, extravagant, and ornate designs before the war. The table tennis parlor that Marty and Wally play at in the film was in reality the first black-owned business in Times Square, called Lawrence's, owned by Herwald Lawrence. The United States were touring the Harlem Globetrotters globally, largely to promote their values of racial progress and freedom, who Marty ends up joining on that tour in the film, and Marty Reisman toured with in real life. And on top of this, there was a newly found sense of Jewish pride. With the end of the Holocaust and the defeat of Nazi Germany, Jewish Americans felt a renewed sense of opportunity and this reinvigoration of their culture, history, and heritage. And Marty, being a young New York American man and a son of Jewish immigrants, made him a product of both of these surges in pride and belief. This is why the film, as Josh Safdie describes, is titled Marty Supreme. It's this ultimate version of himself that only he can see. The supreme version of Marty that he feels he is destined to become. And when it comes to the musical score of this film, you might notice that it sounds very 80s when the film is actually set in the 50s. But it's for this exact same reason of seeing your future self. And I'll use a quote from the composer Daniel Lopatin to explain in more detail because I think he breaks it down pretty beautifully. A lot of the music is from the 80s. I realized that there was something about the dream that Marty's having about a future for himself that although isn't exactly realized the way he wants it, is sort of fulfilled by just imagining something new and imagining something that is yet to be. And there's a metaphor in the score. It's him versus the old world. And it's him against a lot of the people that wanted to kind of hold him down or keep him in his lane. And what he presents is a future for himself and an idea of himself that no one else really sees. Josh also describes integrating 50s style live instrumentation into the 80s style studio synth instrumentation, aiming to make the experience of the film feel mythical and eternal. Because its themes of individualism transcend time. The American dream still exists and drives so many of us today. And a line that I love that Josh uses to describe the atmosphere of the film is, "I wanted the film to feel like you seeing pictures of your parents before you were born," which I think the film achieves effortlessly. And there's actually one more really cool piece of creative context about a deleted scene that really captures the purpose of the 1980s music in this quote from Josh. The general concept is that the movie is being told from Marty's life in the 80s. So it's like the moment when he's first starting to be able to look back at his youth. Like, what was that? At some point in the script, you did see him at the end of the movie at a Tears for Fears concert in 1989. And more than anything, Josh wanted the atmosphere of the film to feel as full of life and vitality as possible, just like Marty as a character. So Daniel paced the musical score to match the bounce and buoyancy and back and forth chaotic nature of a literal table tennis game. And to complete this sense of vitality and intensity beyond just the music, the sound design was crafted to fill the scenes with the background voices and the hustle and bustle of 1950s New York. In classic Safdie fashion, we have characters constantly talking over and under one another. The team even went as far as attaching mics to individual extras in the crowds of spectators for the background voices and conversations to be as vivid and present as possible. And this approach is really no surprise for a director like Josh Safdie. We've seen it in his last two films, Good Time and Uncut Gems, where he's used this approach, describing himself as a maximalist filmmaker, filling his films with as much stylistic music, sound, imagery, and dialogue as he appropriately can. And this maximalist approach can look and feel very vivid and powerful in many ways. But on the flip side, this style can also lend itself to feeling very anxiety-inducing for the audience. And this feeling of discomfort isn't actually a flaw, it's very much on purpose. The anxiety-inducing chaos of the film sets the perfect stage to show us how Marty is an inevitable victim of his own pride. And such a level of ambition comes at a cost. Co-writer Ronald Bronstein breaks down what this cost looks like and feels like to Marty. All of the humiliations that are attendant to a pursuit that's fused with your identity, all the sacrifices that you have to make, all the sort of self-optimizing and selfish decision-making that it engenders. The way it holds you in place and turns you into a nomad because you can't commit to a job and you can't commit to a family because you have this idea for the future of yourself that's sort of preordained and it's holding everything else hostage. Again, in classic Safdie fashion, we have a massively flawed character create problem after problem for himself out of deep feelings of insecurity, impulse, and desperation for something greater. And while these traits contain the fire that fuels his excellence as a player, they lead to these crippling decisions that only isolate him further and further from his family, friends, and community. This reality also highlights the falsehood and embellishment of the American dream in the 1950s. The period wasn't as hopeful as the United States was marketing itself to be. Although the Globetrotters were touring, immigrant businesses were popping up, and the Jewish community felt a new sense of pride, there was still a very heavily prevalent sense of discrimination and hardship across the United States for minorities and immigrants. And Josh describes how he wanted to hint at this dark side of the American dream by including the speculated facade of the Harlem Globetrotters touring with Marty, by showcasing the systemic barriers Marty would have to overcome despite his pride and dedication. And most symbolically, the very intentional placement of the lead song in the soundtrack, Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears. And I'll let Josh explain why he used this song and how it captures the irony of the American dream. If you focus on the lyrics of it, they're laced with anxiety, but the production of it has this kind of joyous, almost triumphant feeling to it. But it's talking about how everybody cannot rule the world. In capitalism, there has to be winners and there has to be losers. And there's a sadness to that if you ever lift up the rock and look underneath it. So I look at that, I try to tap into that general feeling in the way I approach making the film. But as conflicted and flawed as Marty and 1950s America both are, there's actually quite a bright light at the end of the tunnel in this story. So let's discuss how that plays out symbolically. In theme number 3, Preciousness of Life. If you've seen the last 2 films directed by Josh Safdie, specifically by the Safdie brothers, Good Time and Uncut Gems, you'll know that Josh really likes to keep things raw. Just like Marty Supreme, these 2 films contain plenty of disorienting camera work, crowded dialogue, morally flawed main characters, and what I really want to talk about, non-actors. For background actors, the Safdies would often use the natural reactions and behaviors of the public, unaware they were in a movie. For minor roles, they would hire individuals really in the profession of the character they're playing. And for supporting roles, they would hire first-time actors who carry the essence of that character already in reality. Josh mentioned that shooting Marty Supreme as a period piece took away a lot of those real-life advantages that they had before. But fortunately, casting director Jennifer Venditti explained how they applied a very similar strategy to shape these characters and these major themes in this film. We're not looking for non-actors just to do something cool. It's like, how can someone's life inform the written word in a way that someone else couldn't? And I think Kevin is an example of that. And the Kevin that Jennifer is referring to is Kevin O'Leary. While Kevin O'Leary is not an actor and has never acted in a movie before, the team describes that naturally he exudes the essence of his character. The reality shows he's famous for, Dragon's Den and Shark Tank, represent quite literally the gatekeepers standing between you and the American dream. And Kevin, proudly the Simon Cowell type main villain of the show, represents cold corporate America and the dark side of individualism. Ronald and Josh explained how all Kevin needed to do was be himself, the guy on Shark Tank, and he would nail the role. In the film, thematically, Kevin's character, Milton Rockwell, is the cold corporate American barrier between Marty and his dreams, proposing a deal entirely built out of Marty's humiliation, eventually crushing his sense of pride and exploiting his desperation as he spanks him with a table tennis paddle. The same strategy goes for Gwyneth Paltrow, cast as Kay Stone. Similarly to Kay, Gwyneth has a multi-decade Oscar-winning Hollywood career, but hasn't had a major role in a film since 2015. And thematically, Josh describes how Gwyneth's character was inspired by classic Hollywood actresses Ruby Keeler and Grace Kelly, both women who represent all American femininity, Hollywood legacy, and suburban American ideals, with very clean, graceful and poised public images, soft facial features, and warm, inviting demeanors. From the outside looking in, Kay represents the classic trophy wife of the American dreamer, which is why she's married to Milton Rockwell, and is also why Marty is so allured and infatuated by her. She signifies the classic idea of American success that he believes he's destined for. Rachel, on the other hand, represents the opposite of what Kay means to Marty. Rachel, as Josh describes, is the soul, something bigger than Marty can see, the believer. Despite her many shortcomings, she represents modesty, humility, sacrifice, and forgiveness, a woman who will do anything for those she truly loves. And Rachel sees a purity, a light in Marty's character that is truly special despite his greatest impulses and temptations. That light is something Josh Safdie claims is the most important element of his character. And this light, this purity, inspires the many characters around him in very positive ways. Josh describes how Marty inspired Kay to return to the stage after several years out of the limelight, seeing his thirst for stardom reminding her of a younger, more passionate version of herself. He described how Marty inspired Wally just for a brief moment to completely forget about all of his personal problems as they danced to The Fat Man by Fats Domino, a song entirely about indulging in the purest of joy and happiness. And finally, inspiring Dion to take an entrepreneurial chance and spend his time and money on the design and order of the orange 3-star Marty Mauser ball, which he always deeply believed in. So this brings me to the conclusion of the film. And if you've seen as many interviews with Josh Safdie as I have, you'll very soon realize that this climax and conclusion is a direct expression of how he was feeling when he finally completed Uncut Gems, as we've seen him kind of describe much earlier on in this video. And I'll break this down entirely as we go through the climax and the ending. So in many of these interviews, Josh describes, Marty giving in to the deal with Rockwell of losing in Japan was him giving in to this illusion of the American dream with the manipulative corporate gatekeeper. And the punishing consequences of agreeing to this deal reminds Marty of the real reason why he followed his dream in the first place. It was never to politically climb the ladder of greatness by compromising his truest self, purposely losing a game. It was embracing his truest self through the love of the game he was born to play, doing everything he can to win every time he picks up a paddle, which is why he demanded a rematch. This is the same realization Josh came to when he finished Uncut Gems. It was never the result of completing the 10-year film that he cared so much about. It was the process of making it, the love for directing and filmmaking. And that realization allowed him to tap into his humanity and humility and see how important the bigger picture of life was. So when Rockwell came up to Marty and told him this could end him as a success in America, Marty was completely unfazed. It was never about that in the first place. There was so much more to live for, and everything that made him happy was always right in front of him. And to tie together how closely related Josh's personal story about Uncut Gems and his story in this film about Marty Mauser are, Josh proudly says that the next thing that he did after completing the production and the press tour of Uncut Gems was get married and have children with his now wife, Sarah Rosain. When I looked into my firstborn's eyes, I got lost in the infinite time loop. I just saw the everlasting future, and there was something incredibly humbling about it. Throughout the film, you see him have these moments of humility, and humility is very important because it keeps us all in check. And I think in that ending, it's not about him anymore, and I think there's something quite freeing and beautiful to that. I really needed the baby to stop crying in a moment where it locks in and Marty sees the infinity. He sees the everlasting of time. So the final shot of the baby is the same reason we see the egg being fertilized in the opening title sequence. It's literally the beginning and the end, the infinity, the most pure and natural reminder of how blessed we are to simply be alive and how much bigger than ourselves life really is. Alright, this is my analysis. I'm super excited to discuss your thoughts in the comments below and answer any questions that you might have. And of course, there are plenty more details and elements of commentary and examples of references to history that I might not have seen or am unaware of, so please let me know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.